Good afternoon, everyone. Please join me in welcoming our speaker today, Dr. Joseph Polman. Dr. Polman is a professor and the Associate Dean for Research at the University of Colorado Boulder School of Education. Dr. Polman's work focuses on the crucial intersection of learning, identity development, and project-based learning, particularly among young people. Today, he will share his insights on how data-infused interdisciplinary project-based learning, or DIPBL, can ignite a passion for data in youth, particularly through data storytelling activities that can help young people not just understand data, but see themselves as data persons, individuals who recognize the relevance and power of data in their lives. Dr. Polman has been a past president of the International Society of the Learning Sciences and is the author and co-author of numerous books and publications, including Situating Data Science, Exploring How Relationships to Data Shape Learning. Without further ado, please join me in welcoming Joe Polman as he shares his insights on cultivating the next generation of data persons.
Thank you. It's wonderful to be introduced by Priyanka, who I got to work with at CU Boulder a few years ago before she came here. Good afternoon. Thanks for coming to hear from me today about some of my work. As she said, my name is Joe Polman. In addition to the areas that she said, I'm affiliated with our program in learning sciences and human development at CU Boulder School of Education. I'm going to read most of this presentation because it keeps me on track, and I learned earlier in my career that's the better way for me to present. Here's the plan for this talk. First, I'll describe how I think educational data storytelling activities could help develop so-called data people. This has to do with some ideas about the relationships between identity development and learning. Next, I'll touch on why this would matter, based on the role of data in contemporary life. The bulk of my time will be devoted to ideas on and examples of what colleagues and I call data-infused interdisciplinary project-based learning, or you could say it DIPBL, is the way that we like to say it. My examples include a project from a few years back on engaging youth in data journalism and a recent and hopefully ongoing project called data-PBL. I'll try to pull things together at the end. For much of my career, I've been implicitly working on the assumption that data storytelling could foster the development of more data literate data people. This is informed by what we know about learning and development. The reason this is important is that it helps us fulfill our purposes for organized educational efforts. In much of contemporary public rhetoric and policy documents, particularly about schooling, the purposes mentioned are primarily economic. Prepare people for jobs, ensure we have an adequately educated workforce. But I and most of the other educators I know see it differently and talk a lot about two of the main purposes being enabling people to participate in civic life of their communities and society, and to live healthy, fulfilling, and moral everyday lives. Engaging in data storytelling, I contend, that helps them become more data literate data people can contribute to all these aims. I'll say a bit more about each of these. The phrase learning and becoming in practice describes what I see as the most compelling family of accounts on learning and development. These are based on sociocultural theory and practice theory, and when viewed as I and some others do, try to incorporate cognitive accounts of learning as well. By participating in practices, people both learn and develop their identities and identifications. They become new people. Leslie Herringcole and Veronique Meridel used similar phrasing in their 2010 book, where they talked about learning and development as coming to be, know, and do. Well-designed learning environments provide powerful opportunities for people to change who they are, what they know, and what they can do. So let's talk about what kind of people we want to support. Hope you like my shirt. The development of in educational systems. Here, I want to draw on the growing body of research on disciplinary identification and learning. Research on whether and how people see themselves as math people and science people and STEM people has provided some important insights into the ways that coming to be certain kinds of people relates to learning and doing. My colleagues Kate Miller, Trang Tran, and myself decided to ask, why not data people? The so-called data science education community that I and some people in this room are engaged in is growing for several reasons. One is the increasing prevalence and pervasiveness of data across academic and professional life, and the importance of data science analyses to our contemporary environment. Big data and data analysis inform and influence political and community decisions and actions, as well as everyday life. In our politically polarized environment, as well as consumer realms, unfortunately, misinformation and disinformation are used to persuade and mislead people at times. My hope is that supporting the development of data people will contribute to a more healthy and flourishing society. We want to develop the sort of people who see data as relevant to their lives, have agency with using data, and have competence at using data fluently and judiciously at informing epistemic understandings of difficult issues. I want to briefly answer the question that Talking Heads posed, how did I get here? This is a thread that goes through my career since graduate school. Back in the 1990s, even though we didn't use the terms data storytelling or data science education back then. I came through this through the route of project-based learning in STEM environments involving data visualization. Back in the 1990s on the COVIS project to start with, and I've been working on R&D efforts in this tradition for over 30 years now in various ways. This slide shows a summary of the major initiatives in this category I've been involved in. These initiatives have been both in schools and a variety of out-of-school programs, all have some degree of interdisciplinarity. In many, learners have created media, such as presentations, posters, and news infographics. Most have involved teenage youth. The first initiative, I'm going to get rid of that thing there. Sorry, I didn't notice that before. I'll describe is STEM literacy through infographics, or SLI as we called it. I don't need to tell you that STEM refers to science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. In our conceptualization, STEM literacy refers to developing the capability to use STEM in everyday life. Infographics are representations of data and ideas using text, graphics, and charts, like this one about the history of milk production in the United States. This is by far the best youth-created infographic that happened during this project. So it's our favorite example. Each cow icon on the left, let's see, do I have? Yeah. Represents 1 million cows, showing the difference between 1944 and 2000, where the number has gone down. The white drops of milk on here show over time. This is 2000 over here. This is 1960. Represent the growing amount of milk produced from across those years by the fewer cows. This is thanks to various agricultural policy changes and scientific advances like bovine growth hormone, which are described in these call-out text boxes. I'm extremely grateful to the many collaborators on this project, especially Engida Gebre, Joanna Weidler-Lewis, and Stephen Summer, who most directly informed what I'll share today. In this initiative, we talked about
Can you go back? Sorry.
Yes.
I don't know if you've been warned about me in particular.
No, I have not.
But so it looks to me like production's going down. Something is going down. It's the number of cows going down, but the
Oh yeah, this is the number of cows on the number of cows goes down, and the amount of milk production
is
in
how big
those
the milk blob
is the milk blob. It's going way, way up. So that's why it's called more milk, less cows.
Fewer cows.
I know. That's the funniest thing. It is fewer cows. That's why. Yeah. We're good. I do welcome clarifications and so on.
There's all sorts of text. It's pretty busy to me, but you say that's a good example.
But it was a student
For
produced
kids.
example.
This is a youth-produced example, and this was within what we did was we ran a publication, an online news magazine that posted these. So these are basically like what you used to see in USA Today and so on. And the New York Times had some really good infographics producers, and they still do these. I still maintain it's really good. The only mistake in this is the less cows as opposed to fewer. But I'm willing to live with that. And believe it or not, that was discussed, but I'm not going to get into that. So we talked about in this initiative contextualizing science in life. This graphic is one way of showing how we worked on this notion of contextualizing science in life. So we can say that science and technology relate to many personal concerns of young people and adults, things like health, nutrition, technology. And in these data journalism projects, young people could choose to research about such topics that interested them in the sort of open-ended project-based learning sense. They often chose projects directly related to their lives or people they knew directly. Science and technology also relate to societal concerns people have and can inform public debates and votes. There are examples like environmental, energy, and health policies. And in these data journalism initiatives, they often chose topics on these as well. Once young people working on an infographic had a topic, they crafted a news story or infographic and that required them using scientific practices like data analysis and so on. And it's important for this case. And it also required working on honing their communication skills. You can read more about this in this publication that Angita was the lead on. So as part of the slide curriculum, students began the infographic creation process, like as I said, identifying something meaningful to them. I'm going to talk about two youth who chose climate change, one of the most difficult projects to just do your own project on when you're not in a class about climate. And they wanted to specifically look at the effect on hurricanes. The context for their infographic development were different. Lara was entering her junior year. She was part of a one-week summer camp. Chelsea was close to graduating from her high school, and she had lucky enough to have a data analysis elective class. And it was one of her last requirements before graduation. Despite the two different contexts, they engaged in similar processes of constructing an argument from the current and historical data on hurricanes and its relation to climate change. They researched hurricanes, assuming there would be data revealing the effects on frequency and intensity. They used similar data sources, including NASA and NOAA, but ultimately they both concluded that the data available at that time on rising ocean temperatures caused by climate change did not at that time show any decisive correlation with a change in either frequency or intensity. And this was about 10 years ago. So this is Lara's final infographic. We're not going to get into the details at all here. I'm just going to focus in on this statement that was in the middle part of the text there. She stated, the scientific community has been in disagreement over the subject. On one side, people are saying that global warming has created an ideal environment for hurricanes to form, while others are saying that although we are on an upward trend, there is no evidence linking global warming to hurricanes. So now we're going to look at what Chelsea did, and you can't see this one at all in this room. You can see her key phrase I'm going to focus on briefly. Her final claim on her infographic was, although it's possible that climate change may have something to do with hurricane frequency or intensity, we lack observational data to truly prove anything. So you notice the hedging there, and that was worked on quite a bit. in interactions with her teacher. Her teacher's expertise helped Chelsea grasp what's called Atlantic multidecadal oscillation, or AMO, which is believed to affect sea temperatures in a cyclical timescale and helps to explain some of the patterns in data she could see. She also learned of the change in sophistication of instruments used to measure hurricane intensity. This led her to conclude that hurricane data collected during the 20th century was, quote, faulty and merely estimated. Thus, she participated in a sometimes neglected aspect of epistemic practices of argumentation in data science, which is critiquing the adequacy of some of the data sources and methods by which they were collected and the consistency of that. She argued that current data collection methods were needed to come to better, stronger evidence and better conclusions about the impacts of climate change on hurricane intensity. So I'd say that Chelsea developed a critique of the data collection methods and a sense of the explanatory models behind predictions of future effects. Some aspects of the data science, such as the computer models behind climate change and hurricanes, continue to elude her, though. And she struggled with how to position herself in relation to politicized ideologies. Related to that, both of these students were dismayed by their findings. Laura called herself sad because she wanted to be able to show a causal relationship between climate change and hurricane activity, and not report no relation, as she ended up doing. Similarly, Chelsea didn't want anyone to think she was a climate change denier. That was counter to her identity. Her dismay was compounded by an interaction which I witnessed at a public symposium that they held, where a member of the public came up and said, "I want to know what you think," and seemed dismayed that Chelsea wasn't saying that climate change was affecting hurricane frequency. Chelsea stuck with the claim that there wasn't enough data, but she was not comfortable with where that left her. So in my view, she seemed to be feeling a tension between her developing identity as a rigorous scientific data analyst and her identity as a believer in the overall case for anthropomorphic climate change. In our current situation of ideological polarization with respect to climate change, how her epistemic stance should fit into a stance on practical action was not clear to her. And her class was not about how to take action based on these scientific epistemic criteria, but our climate change debates are in part about that. So this is part of the interesting complexity of asking people to become data people and the dilemmas that they get into. Stepping back, I want to share a broader view of students who participated in this program. This slide shows how results from 272 students who participated in the research we conducted and filled out pre-post surveys and questionnaires responded to those. As you can see, there were statistically significant gains in their self-described interest in science in school and outside, and in their recognition by others as being science people. We weren't asking about being data people in that project, but we're going to get to that. They also showed gains on a small measure of mathematical reasoning we adapted for this, the last thing right here. So that was SLY, and that provided an entree to the next initiative I'll talk about. I'm talking super fast and I am doing okay on time, I think. So I think I might slow down a little bit. Actually, I'll pause while I'm taking a breath and say, any questions about the SLY stuff before I move on to that are clarification and so on. Yeah.
The previous slide, the 272 students.
Yeah.
Students, middle school students, and mix.
These are, I believe, we had some middle school students in the mix in this project, but not all of them participated in the research. I think this is all high school students. Yeah, thanks.
What does a double asterisk mean? P?
That's at less than 0.1 significance level on a paired sample t-test between the pre and the post. So it's simple.
So there's no, does that mean there's no evidence that went up?
No, all of
There
them
is evidence
is
that went up.
all of them have statistically significant evidence. Sorry, I put the stars over here rather than over here.
So, okay.
I'm only reporting
It
the
went up by
significant.
0.2 and the standard deviation is, I mean, you're not, I don't know, it's not a statistics class. I
Yeah.
don't think, you're saying that going from 3.4 to 3.6, if the standard deviations are bigger than 1, is significant?
It was in this data set, yes.
Well, those are the standard deviations of the means and not the standard deviations of the difference, the mean of the difference in.
Yes,
the mean
that's
of the
correct.
And so. I don't think those standard deviations tell us a whole lot about how you get to the double star.
Right, they tell us more about the range. They tell us more about the range that we had on
Right.
pre and post than about the change.
Right.
But the significance level was about the change. Thank you.
Maybe just for this kind of purposes, maybe presenting instead of standard deviation, just presenting standard error might be more useful.
Yes. I agree. I agree. We never converted it to standard error. Okay, so next project, let's see where we are. So Chad Dorsey from the Concord Consortium invited me to be part of this next project, which builds on that, but gets deeper into the data literacy part of it. The formal title of this project is Contextualizing Data Education via Project-Based Learning, and we refer to it as DIPBL. And this is our team. I'm once again grateful to all of the collaborators, and I'll especially name Trang Tran, who's now at University of Alaska Anchorage, and Kate Miller, who's at Concord Consortium, who are part of the research team with me. Everyone else listed here was on the co-design team that developed, implemented, and refined some really cool curriculum and data resources. One of the 8th grade curriculum units our team developed, out of 3 that were developed, we developed them, tested them, and refined them. This one was on the stories of Japanese American internees before, during, and after incarceration in World War II. So we're integrating into social studies here. Students read a memoir by Jeannie Wakatsuki Houston, who had been incarcerated as a child with her family at Manzanar. Then they engaged in gallery walks, as shown here, to learn about the internment and incarceration, and to learn about data, asking questions such as why data, what is data, and examining unique representations of data. They learned how to work with data related to this topic on Concord's CodeApp platform, the Common Online Data Analysis platform. They used CodeApp's Story Builder function to create data stories, worked in groups to provide peers with feedback, and finally presented data stories in class. So across the modules, this is some, this was implemented in slightly different ways that were co-designed with teachers at 2 different schools, one in the Northeast and one in the Midwest. Students incorporated English language arts, social studies, and mathematics practices and thinking into their projects. So these are some of those genres that they created. This is the story builder stuff in CodeApp. This is about trends in the experiences of first and second generation Japanese Americans, in this one that you're not meant to be able to read. The middle one shows an infographic poster describing overall trends in immigration to the US, as well as comparing that to Palestinian immigrants in particular, and the struggles to be accepted fully as Americans that were incorporated into this project-based unit. And then the image at right shows the beginning of a short documentary film made by students about the issue of ethnicity and belonging, which they supported with national data, a local survey at their school, and interviews. So you can see they're all hovering around these topics. So we refer to key aspects of what they were doing as interdisciplinary contextualizing and data storytelling. To make sense of this, we've adapted my colleague Josh Radinsky's idea. He's a learning scientist at University of Illinois, Chicago, on data storytelling modes for our own analysis. What Radinsky did is he talked about connecting data to oneself by telling a story about oneself working with data and when it goes really well, narrating oneself into a data represented world. He's also talks about animating a data representation by describing what is going on in the data story with the data. We've specified this as including things like change over time, location, scale, and scope, and data production issues. Finally, Rudinsky talked about incorporating data into extant narratives, which we've incorporated into a broader notion of linking texts to one another that are existing. I'll briefly illustrate these with a case as well, like I did with the previous one. This is a super busy graphic that, again, you're not meant to read, but just get some overview of. This illustrates the complexity of the act of crafting an interdisciplinary data-infused story. Taylor, the pseudonym for this student, indicated that her question focused on how the length of stay in the incarceration camp might relate to the number of people who died. In other words, did staying longer or shorter at the camp have any association with how people survived or did not survive the camp? To answer this question, Taylor built a data story including 5 slides, which you see here. We screenshot the entirety of the slides here in these 5. And I don't want you to read the text, as I said, but focus on the colored highlight on each slide, corresponding with our coding system here. Pink is aligns to connecting data to oneself. Blue with animating a data representation or making sense of the data. And yellow with linking texts to one another. So you see that Taylor used all of these 3 data storytelling practices across her data story slides. These practices were not isolated from one another, but instead showed up together. Linking texts and connecting data to oneself both showed up in the first slide. Connecting data to oneself and animating a data representation both showed up in the second and third slide. All 3 practices showed up in the last slide. The next few slides scope in a bit more on this, and I think you can see it almost enough here. Again, the yellow represents linking to text, and pink represents connecting data to self. The first quote is highlighted yellow, as it's where Taylor made the connection to the memoir and discussions that she and her peers had in class. Linking to text was how she situated her data story. I chose this topic because in class we read about people dying in incarceration camps. The next 2 quotes, so I've got that one there. The next 2 quotes represented Taylor's explanations of her maneuvering within CODAP by identifying her intention for using the data, that is, by seeing how old the people were the year that they died, then comparing how to use to how long they stayed at the camps. She also indicated the specific attributes that she would use and provided the rationale behind these decisions. In box 2 on the right, Taylor recalled the attributes that she decided to use in her data story, naming them and explaining what data are provided under such attributes, making connection to why these decisions are reasonable and helping her answer her guiding question. These are both telling a story about oneself working with data. Also from box 1 to box 2, we see Taylor moving from her own inquiry or guiding question to verbal text, such as Farewell to Manzanar, the memoir, and to a CODAP data set, which is the stuff in red here. So that's that part. Her next slide, she explained how she maneuvered around CODAP to create her graph, arranging the data by people's birth year, down on the x-axis here, and length of stay, which is on the y-axis here. In the excerpt below that, Taylor indicated that the data helped her to see most people stayed 3 to 4 years, whilst some stayed for shorter periods. These are valuable information, but still a step away from examining length of stay and whether the person died in the camp. Thus, she speculated that within the group of people who stayed for less than a year, some might have died when they were there, again with the hedge. She was not able to back up this claim because in the data set we curated, we didn't provide, because we didn't have the students an attribute on when these people died. It was a lot of work to curate these data sets, and that was part of what we did. And I've been talking about the data set curation process, but even so, it doesn't get at all the things that folks are going to be interested at, which was part of what I discussed earlier with people this morning. She also noted that I'm glad I was able to do this and analyze my graphs. I noticed different things other than my question. What we have seen up until this point was a connection of data to oneself through telling a story of self working with data and animating a data representation by specifying patterns in the data. But here, this excerpt showed another dimension of that connection. She narrated herself in a data represented world, this thing down here. So we see her making the step of existing in a world where data is relevant to the things that we think about and do. And this is our big goal. She stressed an appreciation for the experience working with these data because it allowed her to explore different important things besides her original question. So in this final slide on Taylor, we see how connecting data to self, animating a data representation, and linking text are all combined in an excerpt. We believe this excerpt further illustrates her inserting herself into a data represented world. I find if you take a look at this text, this is really potent and haunting, not only in spring 2023 when it was written, but I find it even more so today in 2025 with more mass deportations happening. Taylor and other students were able to relate the data learning experience to their own identities. They worked with multiple texts and they manifest agency by seeking to fulfill a purpose that represented their commitment and communicated findings to an audience. Along the way, they sought to understand the limitations of data and the power of data analysis to inform their judgments. This wasn't just a school assignment. This was something more worthwhile. And we believe this experience helped her become more of a data person. So I'm going to scope out again. Actually, before I do, any quick clarification questions about Taylor's case? So scoping out from the individual case to a broader picture from survey data, we reported on this at the recent Data Science Education K-12 conference in San Antonio, where I met Jeff. Where's Jeff? Yeah, yeah. We collected pre-post retrospective surveys in this project focusing on data identification and positioning. A second area was confidence and efficacy with data. And then finally, data agency and relationships. In future analyses, we'll integrate these results with analysis of focal student interviews about students' perceptions and experiences learning with data, but we haven't finished the interview analysis yet. I'm going to do a great quote at the end, though. We examined the research question, how have 8th grade students perceived and characterized their data identification? And there is a blog post that we made about this on Concord's website. So you can see some of this there. Students' ratings improved on all the 25 questions we had in this survey, and pre-post increases were statistically significant for 22 of the 25. They showed improved data agency. In other words, their self-ratings showed significant gains in ability to interpret and work with data. They showed identity development gains. They identified most with their ability to use data successfully in schoolwork and making sense of data. Overall, they exhibited the power of real-world engagement. Lessons integrating data into social studies empowered students to apply data in personal and societal contexts, fostering a deeper sense of agency. I have some slides from this with an overwhelming amount of data. This is the pre-rating on a scale of 1 to 4, and the post-rating in red. And you'll see that everything increased except I see myself as a math person. And the highest increase was I see myself as a data person. So this is sort of an interesting, this was in a social studies class. And this is an interesting reinforcement for us that we might be onto something in asking people about becoming data persons instead of just asking them about being a science person or a math person or a humanities person. So yeah, we're excited about that. The largest increase in the confidence category was in response to 2 questions that had the same pre-post gains: confidence in doing well in schoolwork that involves data and learning how to use data. It's gratifying that they also increased in their confidence in storytelling with data. In the data agency category, we seem to have moved the needle on getting data out of the math and science silo through these social studies projects, at least for these students, of course. Here we see evidence that students developed agency, such as by seeing data as something they can use to help people or communicate something they care about. So this is a long one, and I'm going to close with this. You can focus on the bolded things here. And I'll let you look at that. The summary is, this eighth grader went from not liking data or seeing the point of it to seeing data as an antidote to stories that go around that are not true. She saw working with data as opening doors and supporting stories that are really true. So I love this quote. So as I reflect back on this thread of my work and look to the future, I'm asking myself, what should data-infused project-based learning, or DIPBL, look like if we want to foster well-educated data people? I think we need some of the trends we're already seeing in data science education, that is community-based, collaborative, and focused on meaningful inquiry and action. Those trends include these things: a focus on both cognitive and non-cognitive processes and outcomes. For instance, my former student Trang Tran's dissertation, one of her 3 articles in her dissertation, is about the emotional configurations of these critical data inquiries. And those emotions have both to do with the data frustrations in work and with the emotionally charged topics that they were looking at having to do with immigration and social justice. Being deeply place-based, which I know people here, I've been talking about being place-based with folks all day here, because community and culture matter, and the work we're doing amounts to enculturation for contemporary civic and personal life. I think it's important to have a valuing of the importance of values, rather than pretending that work we do and as educators and researchers is value neutral. Incorporating concerns with agency and power and how they're constantly at play in human communal endeavors. Relatedly, it's important that we be mindful of how we can set up structures in learning environments that either support learners in effectively exercising agency or dampen it. My hope is that we can make progress at serving the common good with our work and increasing humanity's ability to not only survive, but also thrive and flourish as part of a more just and harmonious world. So that's what I have today. Thank you. I want to thank the sponsors of this research, and again, my collaborators who were listed earlier, and I welcome your questions and responses for the remainder of our time together. Thanks.
Question, it's thought-provoking to me. The two of the case studies that you showed, one, where the two individuals came to conclusions that maybe were not what they had hoped. But they, in what I will say, an objective way, understood that this is what they could say about the hurricanes and climate change. But then I also look at the later one, connecting data to oneself. I was trying to understand what that really meant. And the sense I got was, in part, you probably need to correct me, it's some of that, the example you showed was talking about methodology and conclusions of the study that the student is doing, framed in terms of sort of a first person. This is what I did, this is how I interacted with the data, which almost seems in a way contrary to me to sort of scientific method, objective approach to the looking at a problem. Certainly it is not in many sciences that I'm familiar with as a statistician, the kind of way we would write up, you know, a study or a project we might engage in. So I look at those and I'm thinking, that's interesting. Does it have the potential to set up students in a way that they think it's always about inserting them in the story? And, you know, I'm maybe old fashioned in this regard. Is that problematic in some cases?
Right. First of all, I want to say I appreciate that question so much because I feel like I queued up that question implicitly without giving you any indication of how I stand on it. So,
No, we talked before, right?
so, so one of the reasons why back to, this notion of values, and I believe we should be enculturating into the political and identity complexity that those first ones that were, the first cases that I gave with the hurricanes, where you're right, in their infographics, there was no I, they weren't inserting themselves and so on and so forth. And to be clear, I think that part of the reason that was that way is because it was genre specific. And that genre, as it was being exercised, was more like data journalism, where journalists aren't directly revealing their subjective viewpoints and so on and so forth. And the data storytelling that they were doing, that the youth I call Taylor in the second case was doing, was not set up as journalistic, but instead this kind of data storytelling that's more informal, where the I gets mentioned. And it's this mixture of I statements and this is the world statements that I see by empirical, with the support of empirical data. And so I'm in the camp of, informed by social studies of science, science, technology, and society kinds of studies, and Latour and that kind of stuff, in the camp that people are always inserting their subjective perspectives in their science and mathematical claims, whether they're making it obvious and admitting so or not. And so I'm not going to say that everybody should be telling data stories like the example of Taylor, which was my second one in this DIPBL project. And I want to actually stress that a lot of the products that people made didn't do that as much as Taylor's did, because they, as I showed, they were trying to create different genres of things. And the way you would do that in different genres and with different voices, there's choices you can make. But I think getting people to reflect on both what they're, when I'm working with youth, tend to, and older folks would tend to move away from the subjective objective distinction, instead talk about that people have positionalities toward these things, and rather than objective, talk about, is this empirical, supported by empirical data, and in what ways, and what is the power of the methods and findings that I have based on my empirical data analysis, and what are the limitations of that. And I still have a personal position on this that informed both what I did there, and informs how I think about what these empirical data and my analysis of this informs what I took out the part of this talk that was going to be about phronesis or wise action. But what are the practical actions that one is going to take that I recommend taking on these kind of things? I think we should be working with youth to talk about all those dimensions because they include the personal, the political, the empirical, and the epistemic, all in a jumble. And that's the way life is. And that's what folks are coping with.
Thank you.
Thank you. Here and then here.
Am I right to say that the students that participated in this project, high school students?
The first group were almost all high school students. The second project, the DIPBL, is 7th and 8th grade middle school students.
Do you think this approach might be useful for college students?
I do. Yeah. In fact, I was telling somebody, some folks earlier today, that the STEM literacy through infographics project, that project ended, but we have an archival website. I forgot to put it on there, but it's science-infographics.org that has resources and materials that people can draw on to do that kind of project-based learning. And I know that people have used that in middle school, high school, and college courses, stuff from that resource website that we created out of that project about how to do data journalism with infographics as a learning project. So I do think it is exciting. People in discipline-based education research fields in STEM education, I think I'd be interested in seeing people try that. I had to pull up the chat. Ron, I'm going to go to the next person in the room, and then I'll go to yours, Ron.
Thanks, Bill. I was kind of where you were going with action, kind of piggybacking on your question. I wanted to ask what you meant by providing opportunities for action, because you said that that's going to be important for supporting learners in data literacy, because I noticed that in the first cases, we were talking about a summer camp and an elective. This is something I've been dealing with, right? It works, it fits in there. Kudos to you getting it into the social studies classroom, yay, you know, but like the fitting with the formal education and having the time to do this. But I was gonna ask what you meant by providing opportunities for for youth or learners or whoever to take that action.
Yeah, thank you for that. That's something that we've been talking about within this project, and I think in sort of data science education efforts that are involve project-based learning, there's often this kind of one of the ways that people talk about, well, first thing I'll say about it is we're actually having a symposium at the International Society of the Learning Sciences Conference that will partially be talking about this very issue. Because the main way people often talk about connecting to action is doing inquiry, having it be rigorous and scientifically and from a data standpoint, and then doing activism based on the inquiry and informed by the inquiry. And one of the problems that people encounter is that the glorious situation where they are, you know, like there's a scholar named Daniel Morales who's done really good stuff in STEM education, where the students at the school are fighting the local polluter in Chicago, and they get that polluter to have to take action because they went to the city council and this and that happened and so on and so forth. Or smaller scale than that, they do an inquiry related to their school building, and then they make a presentation to the school board or the principal, and something local can change there. In our project and in other projects that I'm aware of at least around the US and a few around the world, we're trying to cope with the idea that you can't get to the glorious version of action in all cases, and we should be prepared for that. And so the action, you need to think about a range of possible kinds of actions where the action of changing myself in my mind is a valued action too. I mean, at the very base level at one end. And then the action of communicating clearly what I've found so that my peers in my classroom and my teacher see it in a way that I've helped influence. That's meaningful and valuable action as well. And then there can be other ways that you can think about action, but those are just a few examples around one end of the continuum and the other end of the continuum. Does that get it? Part of what? Yeah. I think it's a really big dilemma in general for project-based learning, whether it's data-oriented project-based learning or any other. You want to have audiences and you want it to be meaningful, but you have to be willing, flexible, and willing to have different kinds of audiences and different kind of meaningful action that come from it. I'll do Ron's now. Do you want to talk or should I read what you have here, Ron?
Oh, go ahead.
What do you think it means for a young person, especially someone from a marginalized community, to see themselves as a data person? How might that shape how they envision their future roles in society or within their communities? Yeah, this is something that I think as we continue to analyze the interviews, like the recent interview that I did that last quote from, we're going to be trying to get more nuanced on this, but I didn't say this, and I probably should have made this clear. The students in the Northeast version of these classes in the DIPBL project are from a large city with a large immigrant Latinx population, and the students from the Midwestern city, large number of Black students in the classes. And so there were a large number of these students were from marginalized communities. And one of the things that I feel like the teachers and the co-design teams that worked on this, I don't take credit for the good co-design of these data-infused curriculum PBL curriculum modules. That was the rest of the team that was doing that. I think they really succeeded at working on these bridges between thinking about having youth, no matter what their identifications were, including marginalized youth, think about the ways that certain kinds of marginalizations that are experienced by people today are reflected in the kinds of marginalizations that Japanese Americans experienced when they and their families were incarcerated during World War II. And the youth who actually have direct experience within their families or social networks of people experiencing problems with immigration and or ICE actually have an easier time not only getting motivated to think about how we can take lessons from what happened with Japanese Americans in World War II, but they become, they see how meaningful it is in contemporary life. And that helps drive the inquiry and the learning and trying to make strong claims that are well supported and so on and so forth. So I think their future roles in society, what we're shooting for, I don't know how many get there. We want them to see themselves as the kind of person who can use data to inform their everyday decisions and inform civic discussions and whatever civic kinds of engagements they get involved in. And the truth is, we hope that some of these kinds of experiences might encourage them to think about being actively civically engaged in, debates that relate to laws and policies and so on and so forth that workplaces and municipalities might be adopting. So we hope that they become those kind of people. We're not aiming so much for career goals in this as everyday and civic life kind of goals. But of course, it'd be nice if some of them want to be, have careers in data science. So we had here and here.
Yeah, did you notice a shift in attitudes about big data? I mean, big data for me is all these ads coming at me that are personalized to all the websites I've ever visited. And I think that there's probably a lot of fear of big data out there, fear that elections maybe have been shifted by some people in Russia on their keyboards. So
I'd say, I don't think, I feel a sneeze coming on, just a second. I don't think we've done a great job in this curriculum or the way we implemented it at directly dealing with those kinds of the personalized big data realm. I do think we did deal with it a little bit, and actually more anecdotally, my perception, having visited the middle school classrooms, is we saw more of the middle school students being of the attitude, why should I care about all this personalized data stuff? If it makes my life easier, I don't care about giving up my privacy. And that does match what I'm hearing some people working on curriculum about this kind of experiences. The attitude that I will see changed is that CodeApp is not an easy tool to use. It's not for the faint of heart working with middle school students. I'm just going to say that, and we could talk about that more if you want, but when supported well by teachers who have been guided through and worked on learning how to use it themselves, it helps overcome the fear of large data sets that I think many middle school students have. Like, large data sets seem like too much until they have an experience of using a tool and doing an analysis that uses something more than a toy tiny spreadsheet, which is most of what they're otherwise exposed to in many schools. Yeah, this one, this might be our last one.
I'll try and keep it brief. I guess I'm thinking out loud about math person versus bullet person. I think most of us in this room probably think there's a big overlap between those two arenas.
I do too.
Surprising to me that school or high school or have completely different views on this based on their current experience. Like, for most of them, math is probably dry, abstract, no self-choice.
Yeah, so first of all, to them, math is math classes that they've had.
Solve for X, right? But data is like, there's some inquiry, there's some personal choice and what things they're going to do.
At least the data exposure they had. That's a good point.
It's not
Yeah.
surprising to me that they have completely different views about these things. For them, they're different things.
Right.
I think.
Yeah, and I think also that finding points to something that we can do in our interventions, which is talk about being data people, and what that means, and share a little bit back about that and say, if my perspective as a teacher is that if you're a data person, you're also a certain kind of math person. I'm going to say that out loud as the teacher now, whereas I didn't know before that might be worth saying. So, yeah. All right.
Just quick, is CodeApp the successor of Fathom?
Yes, it is.
Yeah, okay.
Yep.
Thoughts?
Yep. I was reminded by Jeff of that earlier today. Or was that you? I know. Okay. All right. Thanks, everyone.
Passionate about